Hi everyone, it's John from What Up. Welcome back to another video, and today we're talking the Wheel of Time book series. You've been thinking about picking it up. Should you read it? We're going to talk about it in an open and honest way. It's not for everyone, but will it be for you? We're going to try to answer that question in today's video. So if you love the Wheel of Time as much as I do, if you're as excited about the prospect of all of the Wheel of Time projects coming in the next months and years, or if you want to follow us for all of our book and show related content, consider making us your home for all things Wheel of Time. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and of course, folks, tell all your friends. Now, the Wheel of Time show was a pretty big hit, and there were thousands and thousands of people who watched the show who had never read the books, and they talked about it online, they get immersed into the series, and a good number of them picked up the books because of the show. However, with the prospect of the show not having a fourth season, which is seeming fairly likely at this point because it's been so long since Amazon dropped them and no one else has announced they've picked it up, and we've heard nothing to the contrary, a lot of people are wondering what's happening to their favorite characters and they're considering jumping over to the book series to figure that out. The books aren't for everyone, and we're going to try to talk about that in today's video, because if you talk to a Wheel Time fan and you say, should I read this book series? Is this something I should pick up? They're all going to say yes. Like 100%, any Wheel of Time fan will say, pick up the book series, read it. But it is a fairly big commitment, and it is not for everyone, so we're going to try to address some of those concerns in today's video. So, if you are looking to pick up the Wheel of Time book series, and if you're looking to do a read-along as a first-time reader, on my Patreon, I am doing a read-along on the books. The first video is up right now. I plan on putting a video up every 2 or 3 days or so on my Patreon, covering each chapter, each number of chapters, so about 5 chapters per video of the book series, starting with The Eye of the World. In each of those videos, I'm also doing a reread along. So there are tidbits in these chapters that are pretty important to people who've read the series before, full book spoilers. So these are videos that are for everybody. If you want to follow us over there and support the channel, you can do so. However, if you can't or you don't want to, they will be here in the main channel as soon as I finish the book. So once The Eye of the World is done, all the chapters are finished, and I do the hot wash up at the end of it where we talk about the synopsis of the book. I'll port all of that over to the main channel here, one video at a time, of course, and then we'll start the Great Hunt over in Patreon. Patreon will always be one book ahead, but they will eventually be here for free in the main channel if you folks want to watch them that way. So if you're considering picking up the series and today's video is a yes for you, maybe jump over to Patreon to follow us in our read along. So the first thing you have to know about the Wheel of Time is it's a big commitment. It's 14 books, and these books are hefty. So The Eye of the World is arguably the smallest book in the series, and it's 900 plus pages. It's a big book. You have 14 books, a prequel novel, a bunch of short stories, a bunch of companions, art books, those sorts of things. The world is massive. And that can be daunting for a new reader to look at all that and go, oh, that's a commitment. And for some people, like myself, who have to finish something they start, it's a massive commitment if you don't like it. If you have to slog your way through it and push your way through it, and it's not something you really enjoy, but you need to finish it, it can be pretty disheartening. So we're going to talk about that today. Just remember, it's a big, big series. When Jordan wrote this series, he was heavily inspired by Tolkien. And I think I would argue that most modern fantasy authors are in some way, shape, and form inspired by Tolkien. They take themes from Tolkien's books because Tolkien is, let's face it, the grandfather of modern fantasy. However, if you've read the Tolkien books and you thoroughly enjoyed them, that doesn't necessarily mean you'll enjoy The Wheel of Time. Tolkien writes in, I hate to say it, but a little bit of an old-fashioned way. And that's because the books come out a long time ago. Yes, the Wheel of Time books are 35 plus years old, some of them. However, Lord of the Rings books are much older than that. So the way the writer Tolkien wrote the books is a bit archaic. There's a bunch of classics out there, both in sci-fi and fantasy, that everyone says you should read. For example, Lord of the Rings is on that list for fantasy. Dune is on that list for sci-fi. But sometimes they're hard to read because of the language and the tone and the inflection and the way the cadence of the words are written, just because it was normal during that day and time when it was written, but things aren't quite as modern as they should be, and that can turn some people off. What I will say about The Wheel of Time is this. Yes, the book series is 35 years plus old in some cases. The Eye of the World came out in 1990, but it is still holding up to a modern standard. The way Jordan writes the books is more, in my opinion, like poetry than anything else. The words flow just eloquently. It's put together perfectly. It's very easy to read. It isn't written much like some of the older classics would be. This is a much more modern version of fantasy. even though he's inspired by Tolkien, and a lot of the aspects are taken from Tolkien lore. So, like, for example, there are characters within the Wheel of Time that are basically amalgams or copies from the Lord of the Rings books, but they're also amalgams or copies from a lot of historical fantasy, a lot of old folk tales, religions, you name it. Jordan took inspiration from a number of different aspects, but he wrote it in such a way that it is written well and can be read well. And if you're looking for example of another fantasy writer that writes like Jordan, there are very, very few, in my opinion, that can even hold a candle to the way Jordan writes, but Patrick Rothfuss is pretty close, I would say. Yes, Brandon Sanderson did finish the Wheel of Time series, but when you jump from book to book, you can definitely notice a difference in style of the writing. Brandon's an excellent writer. I've read everything he's ever written, and I thoroughly enjoy his works, but he doesn't write the same way Jordan does, at least not exactly. Patrick Rothfuss comes close. If you've read any of his books, then you have an idea of what you're looking for in the way and writing style of the Wheel of Time. Something else to be noteworthy is a lot of people, when they read a book series, they want it to be about one character. They want to have a main character, and they're like, that character, I want to follow this character through the entire book series. That sort of happens with the Wheel of Time. And when I say sorta, it's because there's kind of an argument in the fandom, and I've argued with people over the years about this. I don't believe there's one main character. A lot of people say Rand al'Thor is the main character of the book series, and that's not a spoiler. You can read it on any of the dust jackets. It talks about Rand quite extensively. However, I would go as far to argue as there are probably anywhere between 6 to a dozen, maybe more, main characters within the book series. One of the famous quotes from the series is, "It's not just about me, it's about all of us." And I think that stands really, that's truth when it comes to the series. When you're reading a book, say the early books like Eye of the World, you are only getting a few different point of views, maybe 2, 3, 4 point of views at a time, because it does jump between different characters and different aspects of what they're doing in the world. The early books, it's not quite as involved as it gets later on. By the time you get into, say, the third or fourth book, you're looking at, in some cases, over a dozen POVs in the book series itself. Some are major, some are minor, but a good number of them are major. And you may get attached to a character and really like this character, and then you read a POV by them and you're like, yes, I super want to learn more about this character, what he's doing or what she's doing, what they're up to, and then you don't see them for a while, and that can be disheartening as well. So if you are the type of person that really likes to follow one character, this book series may not be for you because it follows a lot of different characters at once. And that leads into my next thing. You're going to hear a lot of things from people in the fandom about the slog. The slog is arguably a slower turn of the books than other parts of the series, and people, there's sort of an argument when it happens, but most people will agree when you get to about book 10, there's a slog involved there, and book maybe 9 as well, when it starts to slow down a little bit and people don't enjoy the books as much, but they get through it because they want to get to the later books. I would argue that today is not really the case anymore. And there's a reason that kind of started within the fandom and within the community, is that when the books were releasing, you get a book every 2 years or so, like sometimes every year and a half, sometimes 2 years, and you had to wait that time for each book to come out. When I picked up The Eye of the World in 1990, I read it and immediately wanted The Great Hunt. I didn't know it was called The Great Hunt at the time, but I wanted the second book. I got it on release and I had to wait. Got The Great Hunt on release, then I had to wait for The Dragon Reborn, so on and so forth. And when that happens, when you're reading a book, especially with a book with up to a dozen POVs, you get to some of the later books, you have a book that's pretty heavy on certain characters. For example, let's just pick one out of thin air, and this is one that's used in the fandom a lot, Matt. Matt Cawthon is one of the main characters of the book series, one of the more important characters. You read a book that's heavy on Matt POVs, and you really like the character. You enjoy it. You think he's the bee's knees, so to speak. And then you wait 2 years. You pick up the next book in the series, and he's not in the book at all. There's not even a mention of him. That's, I think, where the first ideas of the slog came from, because people would get attached to a certain character, they would get to a book, and they wouldn't be in that character, and they'd have to wait another 2 years to get to more POVs from that character. Some cases, maybe 3 or 4 years if they're skipping a couple of books in a row. So if you hear things about the slog, I wouldn't worry about it too much. Yes, there's not as there is a section of the books that's not as action packed. It truly is. There are sections of the books that kind of are more political, that kind of deal with more serious subjects. They may not have many explosions per minute or battles or things that may interest certain readers. Uh, but I think a large part of what people talk about when they talk about the slog is the fact that they had to wait so long for those books to come out, and when they came out, maybe their favorite character wasn't in it, and it kind of disheartened them a little bit. Um, that's not the case anymore. The entire series is out. You can read the whole series, and although I don't recommend it, you can even skim the parts you don't like. Again, don't recommend that at all, especially in a series that's involved in this. You'll miss things that are very important, but some people do. Um, so the slog I don't think is something that you should worry too much about when you're talking about this book series. And one of the other things I want to talk about is the gray area of books. So if you're looking for a book that is very purposely good against evil, light against dark, The Wheel of Time does a very good job in the fact that it has a fairly set standard for good guys and a fairly set standard for bad guys, but there are a lot of good people on the side of the light or the people on the side of good that are terrible people that do horrible things, and there are people on the side of the dark that do things for arguably reasons that maybe make sense. So there's a lot of areas within the book series that are fairly gray. So there is that. You have to worry about that when you're reading the book series. If you want to have a very cut and dry good versus evil, The Wheel of Time has that in some aspects, but in other aspects of the book series, you're looking at a lot of gray within the characters themselves. Next thing is the magic system. Yes, there's magic in these books, 100%. It's not called magic, it's called something a little bit different, but it's a very hard magic system. It has rules. There are certain fantasy books out there that have soft magic systems where pretty much anything is possible and you can kind of be loosey-goosey with everything. The Wheel of Time is not like that. You're not looking at, say, a Dragonlance or Forgotten Realms type book where magic can pretty much do anything. There are rules to magic. There are rules to how things can work. I like that. Specifically, I like having a hard magic system with rules. That is something I enjoy. If it's something you don't enjoy, that is what you're going to see in this book, and it's pretty prevalent from about the second book on. You do learn a little bit about the magic system in the first book, a little bit about the rules, but really the second book is where you start to learn far more because you're growing along with the characters, and that's when they really start to learn about it. In addition to that, there are a lot of aspects of the book where gender roles are fairly important. So, for example, when this book was written in the early 90s, well, it was written in the 80s, but it was released in the early 90s, it was fairly progressive. The book series was incredibly progressive. Same-sex relationships were not just a thing, they were completely normal within this world, and it didn't focus on them. It was just a thing that was. There are a lot of other aspects of the books that were really, really progressive for its time, but one of the things it does focus on is the differences between men and women. The book series is like that from start to finish. And the reason they do that is because most of the society within the book system, or in the books rather, is a system of matriarchal society. Men had done something that had basically screwed over the world, and women took over. And so for the time when it was written in the 80s and 90s, it kind of flipped those on their head. So all the problems and the stereotypes that men had back then are pretty much given to women in the books, and vice versa, for a lot of things. So if you have a hard time reading about certain very stereotyped gender roles, the book series does deal very heavily in that. And the magic system also deals pretty heavily in that because it's a binary magic system that deals and is based on gender roles within the book series. So there is that. If you can read it for enjoyment and just understand that that is what this world is about and what happens within this world, then it's not really too big of a deal. But if you're looking for something even more progressive, just remember this book series was written in the 80s and released in the 90s, and it went on through, and there are even some mentions of trans characters and whatnot in the books in certain formats and ways, but they're not handled near as well as they would be in modern literature that comes out in the last couple of years. So just be cognizant of that. Other than that, the biggest thing I see is the length, is the breadth of the series. When people ask me questions about it, should I get into the book series, should I read it? Well, you shouldn't let that bother you. You should tackle it one book at a time. For example, The Eye of the World, like I said, is about 900 some pages long, and then they get bigger after that. take each book as it comes. And if you enjoy it, continue on. If you don't enjoy it, set it down. It's the best way I can put it. I highly recommend anyone to read The Wheel of Time. And if you go up to a Wheel of Time fan and you say, should I read this book? They're going to say, absolutely, you should read it. Here's my copy. Take this, smell it, love it, kiss it, enjoy it, taste the cover. It's the best thing ever. That's what people are going to say. And it's probably what I would say too. But everyone has their own opinion, so try reading the series just bit by bit. Take it a book at a time, even a chapter at a time. And for those of you out there who've watched the show and have seen the first 3 seasons and are wondering what happens to my favorite characters, just understand that the book series is fairly different from the show, at least in the journey of where the characters and how the characters got to where they're at. The end of the 3rd season, there are some major changes that have taken place from the book series to the show. They make sense for the show. They would not make sense for the book series when it comes to that. Having to cut things down, change things around, timing, money, brevity is a big thing. Having to explain the world so the average viewer understands. A lot of that stuff happens within the show that does not happen in the book series. So if you're wondering what happens to your characters, the characters are essentially the same in the way they act, in the way they feel, in the way they're perceived by other people, in their thoughts and desires and wants and needs. But the journey they've taken from the beginning of the book to the end of book 4, The Shadow Rising, which is about where the end of the 3rd season stops, is very different. And in some cases, they're in completely different spots in their character progression. They're fast forwarded a lot, I guess, like really ramped up in the speed in which they learn certain lessons and do certain things. They skip major parts of the story. They kind of had to for the show. But you're going to recognize a lot of things, but some things will be very different when you read the book series. So if you're wondering what happens to your favorite characters, I would highly recommend you pick up The Wheel of Time and read it, but just understand what you're going to be reading is going to be a little different in some cases, and in some cases a whole lot different than the show. For example, the show focused on just a handful of characters. In the book series up to that point, you can probably triple the number of characters that you would see on screen that not only had speaking roles, but had names and were very important to the series and would become more important later on. It's pretty easy to introduce a character, say in book 1, in a book series, and bring them back in book 3 and 4, and then not again until 7 and 8, and have them continue on that way. In a show, that's hard because you have to contract the actor for that long. It's easier to either kill them off or not include them at all, which has happened. There's a few deaths that happened in the show that did not happen in the book series, and vice versa. So just be cognizant of the fact that the books are going to be different than the show, but the destination is the same. The thoughts, the actions, and the character development of the characters was on the same path as it would be in the show. I highly recommend you pick up the books if you want to know what happens to your favorite characters. Just remember, it may not be 100% the same. So let me know in the comments down below if you folks are planning on picking up the series. Are you planning on heading over to Patreon to do a read along or reread with me? I'm going to post a video over there every couple of days or so to cover chapters, probably around 5 chapters at a time. That's probably all I can do in a video because my chapter reread/read along video had ravens, which is included in this book here, which is something that is not in every edition of The Wheel of Time. The prologue and the first 4 chapters, I think it was still a 15-minute video. So any more than 5 chapters at once, I'm getting into a lot because I do enjoy talking. So if you want to join us over there, great. If you want to wait, I'd say you're looking at a couple of months before those videos do port over here to the main channel. In the meantime, enjoy the Wheel of Time content I'm going to be putting out here. I'm having fun making videos again, so we will see more and more content here on the channel, specifically Wheel of Time book content. And I still have some show stuff to put out, folks. That's on the back burner. It's coming. While Idle is around the corner, it's coming soon. Don't worry. I am involved in that this year, although not near as much as I have been in the last couple of years because I have not had the time or the bandwidth to do other things. I barely have time and bandwidth to do my own videos, let alone do an additional contest. I really want to thank Lauren from Unraveling the Pattern for stepping up and just basically taking over everything with that this year. He's doing a fantastic job. Yeah, if there's any other videos you want to see from me in the coming weeks and months that are Wheel of Time based, let me know in the comments down below. I have a lot of ideas written down, things I want to do, everything from character profiles to what happens next to what would happen afterwards to certain objects, cultures, things talked about in the books, themes that are talked about in the books. There's basically an unending amount of videos I can do just on the Wheel of Time books, and I plan on doing them. But if there's things you folks want to see, let me know in the comments down below. And again, I want to thank you all for your support in the last couple of months. It's been kind of a hard time for me and my family, and I appreciate all of the well wishes I've been receiving. You folks are amazing. I love you all very much. I appreciate it, and you're still going to be getting Wheel of Time content from me, albeit maybe not as often as it was before, but it's still coming, folks. Tell your friends, tell everyone about what up. Let's see if we can still kind of grow the channel a little bit in the coming months and years. Thanks so much for sticking with us here to the very end. Here's to many more.